The national championship, the Georgia Bulldogs versus the TCU Horned Frogs. TCU is coming off a game against Michigan where they started out on fire. They were playing great, and they kept the back door open and let Michigan creep in. It ended up being a close game. And then Georgia, on the other hand, kind of the opposite. They started out playing terrible, but somehow found a way to win at the end. So, Drew, the point spread's 13 points. That is a massive point spread for a national championship game. And TCU, they have a great team. Max Duggan's a great quarterback, great story. Quentin Johnson, and their star running back did go down, but their backup running back was playing great. Offensive line, veteran group studded with, star guys. What makes you think this point spread deserves to be 13 points?
Yeah, so when you look, and I've said this before when we've done Georgia preview and prediction videos, when it comes to beating the Georgia Bulldogs, you got to have an elite quarterback, which TCU does have, but you also got to have elite wide receivers all around. I mean, just take a look at all of Georgia's losses when you go back and look at the past couple of years. In 2021, Bryce Young in Alabama, Bryce Young was an elite quarterback. 2020, you had Kyle Trask and Mac Jones for Alabama, two elite quarterbacks that could throw for 300, 400 yards. And then 2019, Joe Burrow with LSU. So there's obviously a formula or a certain recipe that you need to beat this Georgia team, and that's you got to have a quarterback that can sling the ball around and have a perfect game and throw for 400 something yards or close to it. And that's why Ohio State was so close to being as successful as they were in taking down Georgia. CJ Stroud had a great game. Ohio State played a really, really good game. Georgia's just the resilience was just too much, and Georgia's just a great team, and that's why they found a way to pull it off. Now, when you look at just college football in general, college football is all about matchups. There's going to be moments where playoff teams will meet together, and both teams will be really, really good. But there's just nowadays it's just one style of football. Sometimes it's just better than another style of football. Teams have different styles in the way they play. TCU. Max Duggan, he's a great quarterback, but he's not the most elite passer of the ball, and that was proven in the Michigan game. He was under 50%. I think he was 14 for 29, a couple touchdowns, 2 interceptions. But he's very dangerous with his legs. Max Duggan can run around, and if you look at the Georgia-Ohio State game, C.J. Stroud, he's not a runner, but he was running around in that game and was giving Georgia a lot of fits. Georgia was getting pressure to him. They couldn't get him down. Max Duggan is a guy that you don't want to mess with. You don't want to give this guy room to run. This guy can run. He's fast. He's elusive. Yeah. He's mobile. Mm-hmm. He's an athlete. And Georgia, they're going to have to find ways to get the quarterback to the ground in this game.
Let me say something about the quarterback run game for a second. You mentioned C.J. Stroud. If you look at film on him, he never ran the ball, ever. So that's why Georgia was out there running man coverage. Georgia doesn't run that much man coverage, and they came out against Ohio State and were sticking at it consistently, even when they were getting torched with C.J. Stroud in the scramble drill because they would lose containment, and you have your back to the quarterback whenever you're a defensive back, you turn into the receiver in man coverage. So but I say that to say this, that wasn't on film, C.J. Stroud running the ball. They know Max Duggan is going to run the ball. They're going to have contained set. They're going to have QB spies on them. They're going to be a lot more conservative as far as their coverage because they know that they can't let him. They're going to be wanting him to throw the ball, whereas they did not want to give C.J. Stroud any windows to throw the ball. They're going to box everything into the middle of the field and dare Max Duggan to throw the ball because they don't want him to have the ability to use his legs because whenever he knows he can use his legs, that's when he starts playing with way much more confidence. And when, confidence is everything. When a guy's coming out there knowing he can sling the ball and do whatever he wants, and if not, he can run the ball, he's going to be playing fearless. But Georgia's just going to contain that. I'm not too much worried in the quarterback run game. You mentioned you're going to have an elite receiver to beat Georgia, and I agree, but I think Quentin Johnson and TCU's receiving group in general is one of the best in college football. Quentin Johnson is an absolute monster. I mean, he does everything for TCU. They'll bring him in motion and give him a jet sweep. They'll isolate him on the outside and throw him a vert route. He can run any route in the route tree. He's an amazing player. So I think that the matchup for me is the matchup issue for me is with TCU defensively. TCU is going to have to play physical. Michigan didn't have a chance to line up in heavy formations and dominate in the run game because they were playing from behind the whole entire game. Mm-hmm. It was forcing that young quarterback from Michigan to throw the football. With Georgia running these heavy sets and running the ball down your throat, that is when you're going to be in trouble for TCU.
Yeah, 100%. That was a great point. And, when you look at Georgia, and again, when I go back and you look at their losses from previous seasons, Georgia would sometimes just beat themselves, they're just not a team that's built to be playing from behind. Obviously, you look at their quarterbacks. You know, Jake Fromm going all the way back in the Stetson Bennett. Those are not two quarterbacks who you can reliably rely on to win games throwing the ball. You know, you saw it with Stetson Bennett. He made a lot of mistakes in that game, and I think Georgia's very fortunate to walk away with a win. I mean, Stetson Bennett had an interception. He's very lucky to not have one or two more. And you even saw it in the or post game interview or whatever when they interviewed Kirby Smart. He was not happy with the way Stetson Bennett played. He was doing a lot too much hero ball. He wasn't really playing within the system. So when you think about how is TCU going to take down this Georgia Bulldogs team, TCU is going to have to do exactly what they did in that game against Michigan: jump out to an early lead, take Michigan or take Georgia out of their comfort zone where they can't run those heavy sets like you said, and force them to throw the ball. When Stetson Bennett's forced to throw the ball and they're playing from behind, I think that's when they're most vulnerable to making mistakes. And when you get them in that situation, in that panic mode, I just think that's your best chance to beat Georgia. And then last thing I want to say as a Georgia fan, you know, I'm very picky. Obviously, Georgia is a great football team. They're in the national championship. There's not much for me to really complain about. But I am really concerned about the way the defensive line played against Ohio State. Ohio State, I mean, I think Ryan Day, they drew up a good scheme. I think they put together a perfect offensive game plan. And I think they blocked Georgia's blitzes really well. But I just think, you know, I've watched a lot of Georgia games. I watched every single one. The effort from that defensive line and that front seven that I was seeing just didn't look like it was the same as it's been in games past. You know, when you look at the Tennessee game or there's a couple other games that come to mind where that defensive line, it just looked like they were just playing mad and mean. I just didn't see that same aggressiveness when they were playing Ohio State. Jalen Carter is supposed to be the best player in the college football playoffs. He's projected to go number 1 or number 2 in the NFL draft. You would have never known this dude had played against Ohio State. He was dressed out, he was on the field, but he only had one tackle. He had one tackle the entire game. The times I saw him, the only times I really saw him and actually like realized Jalen Carter was there is when they showed a camera shot of him on the sideline. I don't know if he was just gassed or if he was just dealing with some kind of injury that we don't know about. Jalen Carter is going to have to show up in this game, though. I think TCU is a good, you know, they could be dangerous in running the ball, like we mentioned, and that defensive line is going to have to find that nasty aggressiveness again. I feel like if they're able to do that, get pressure on Max Duggan, force some bad throws, I think Georgia's in good shape.
Yeah, it's definitely going to start with the D-line because TCU's O-line dominated Michigan's front seven, and that's where all their rushing yards came from. I mean, their backup running back came in, and it was like they didn't miss a step. So that's definitely going to be a factor there. And then also on Georgia's defense, Ringo. I mean, I've been dogging Ringo since we made this channel, and Georgia fans are so quick to come to my neck. But I'm going to keep saying this, okay? Ringo, he's a great defensive back. He does a lot of things great. But whenever the ball's in the air, his ball skills are absolutely terrible, okay? He never turns his head around. He does everything else great. He's a great tackler as well. He's aggressive in the run game. And you've mentioned this too, you want to see development in a guy, okay? It's okay if, you know, you're making mistakes, you know, getting a bunch of pass interference calls when you're a young guy, but now you're going to get targeted, dude. Quinn Johnson is going to be lined up in front of you, who I think he's better than Marvin Harrison. I mean, it's up in the air, but Quentin Johnson's a monster, okay? And he will, you know, little boy you if you let him. So the Georgia's defense is going to have to be prepared, which I think they will, because you mentioned they didn't play well against Ohio State, and Kirby Smart said that as a whole team, you know, they didn't play well. They probably didn't even deserve to win the game. So, but with all that being said, I'm going to get into my prediction real quick. 13 points, you know, I figured it was going to be over 10. 13's a lot. I wasn't going to go with Georgia at first, but I think Georgia is a great team, and I think TCU is a really good team. I think that the front seven and the difference in just depth and size and just nastiness, it's going to show. And, you know, like I mentioned, I think Georgia's going to line up and just run the ball down TCU's throat, and I think TCU's going to have a problem stopping that. And as a result, TCU's offense is not going to be on the field much this game, and I think the Dogs are going to run through them.
Yeah, I think I'm right there with you, Aiden. You know, 13 points, you look at it for a national championship game, and of course, everyone's going to look at it and be like, that's a lot of points. You know, it's just very hard to pick. But, you know, talking about the matchup and talking about the kind of team TCU is versus the kind of team Georgia is, I feel like it's just so heavily favored towards Georgia. I think when Georgia plays against a team that's not a heavy passing team, and I know TCU likes to throw the ball, but they're not elite passing. You know, you don't think of TCU and think they're slinging the ball around for 400 yards. Those are the only kinds of teams that have had success in beating Georgia. And TCU is just not like that. You know, no one's ran the ball in Georgia in really 4 or 5 years ever since Kirby Smart's been there. I mean, you can go back and look at the stats. no team has been able to successfully run the ball against Georgia, and I don't think TCU is really going to come in and do it either. The only success I think TCU is going to have in this game is maybe Max Duggan's able to break free. Maybe Georgia breaks contain, and Max Duggan can get around and run around with his legs and be explosive that way. But I just think Georgia's offense is just clicking on all cylinders. Even though they didn't play a great game against Ohio State, they still put up 42 points and outscored that amazing Ohio State offense with elite wide receivers all around. And like you said, TCU is not really known to be a juggernaut on defense. And if they struggle to stop that run game for Georgia and Georgia is able to limit TCU's possessions, I think this game could honestly get pretty ugly. TCU is going to have to find ways to get creative in this game. I don't think they're just going to be able to line up, run the ball down Georgia's throat like they did against Michigan. But anything could happen. As a Georgia fan, I'm really excited for this game. To even be in this position to go back-to-back is truly, something thought I would never see. But I'm going to take Georgia, 13 points. I think Georgia is going to cover. And that's going to wrap it up for this season.